we saw the Australians during the week, like the Australian government, very, very worried about an aluminium and steel tariff. And again, if they'd looked at the numbers, they would have been able to go to sleep quite well.
Let's look at those numbers, actually, because you've got a chart, I know. So if you wouldn't mind throwing that up, mate. Because I think it's just so pertinent to the fact that we bang on about all this crap in the news. You see all these news stories just focusing in the wrong direction. But the reality is much different, right? Here we go. The value of aluminium ores, experts in millions of dollars versus 2024.
Well, so that millions is billions, so 12.8 billion. So that's a pretty decent, you think about it. Something like education, which is sold as an export, is around 21 billion, and that's the third largest. So that's gold. It's a top five, top six export aluminium ores, and that's so. But the standout countries are Taiwan, yeah, well as China, is Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman. So guess what? Australia's aluminium exporters are going duty-free in the Middle East and Asia, and they're ignoring Trump's tariffs, which are the value of aluminium ores to the United States in 2024, 60 million.
Tiny.
Exactly.
How does that compare with iron? What about iron ore?
Iron ore's around at it's $7 to $8 billion, $9 billion a month. Exports are $72 billion, 75 billion annually. I mean, some years it gets up to 100.
So it's less than the aluminium.
No. So the aluminium is 12.9 for 2024. Iron ore is around 80 billion to 90 billion on any given year. Probably closer to 110, 120 in more recent times. But the reality is mining doesn't employ that many people, but it's the magic ingredient is the fact that it's an upstream commodity. There's lots of it. The volumes are massive. The problem for iron ore exporters, and particularly miners in Western Australia, is that you've got one major customer and that's it. Whereas in that aluminium case, 40% of those exports go to the Middle East. Canada, by a significant margin, buys more aluminium ores than the United States. So that's the point. And so there's you got to be able to dig below the headline as opposed to wiping $20 billion off your stock market because the fund managers in Sydney were too lazy to look at the real detail. So there we are.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so cost of energy, we've talked about that. Cost of government, we've talked about that. Cost of labour is the other problem. We just can't seem to get a manufacturing industry going.
No.
And we never will, I suppose. I mean, what?
Build robots and be done with it. We cannot do manufacturing. Even advanced manufacturing will never be able to compete with the Germans or the Japanese or the Swiss. Okay? Why? Because we don't have a culture of it. And it takes decades to build a capability to satisfy it. So look at what we do well and do value add for what we do well. And that's,
okay.
And that's
are our wages too high? I mean, people are arguing, the unions are screaming that, wages haven't kept up with inflation. I mean, as if wages are supposed to keep up with inflation. I don't know that they are, otherwise you wind up with an inflationary spiral. But anyway.
I would say our wages are probably, to be honest, I think they're reflective of a tax system, of a poorly designed tax system, which gives an artificially high headline. So, there's more in the space, if you know what I mean.
So you're saying if there was less income tax, that would bring the amount of take-home pay up without business having to pay for it?
It just has to be flipped, that's all.
Yeah, okay. So higher GST, you would say?
Absolutely, slash it all.
Doesn't putting up the GST then have a deflationary, a recessionary impact on the economy overall? Isn't that going to make people not want to spend?
Well, I suppose the alternative is continue doing more of the same, where people are belt tightening anyway. More discretionary income gives you choice. We don't have choice when we're giving away 30% of the take-home pay to the government. So we don't have any choice, right? So there's
of course. So if you're taking home more and you put the GST up, you've still got more. You've still got as much buying power, and you've got more control over it.
Exactly. You know what? Find a solution. You know what I mean? That's how it encourages more of a solution. And guess what? We'd actually be in line with the OECD if we did that.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So all of those things, I mean, the cost of energy is being driven up by net zero policy, I would say.
Correct. There's no question about that. Like, it doesn't. Well, it's not working, and that's where and that's what we're finding out. I mean, and like shutting down coal power stations has not worked. So there we are.
Cost of labour is primarily, as you know, it's tax policy, but also wage policy. I suppose that's kind of obviously a left wing issue. If you're a union, obviously, you care about labour costs being higher. You want them higher. Cost of government, obviously, we've talked about obviously as a left wing thing because you've got the cost of government expansion. So really, what we're dealing with here is this conflation of three drivers that are predominantly aligned with left wing ideology and philosophy of net zero, high labour cost, high wages, and big government. And we need to tackle one or two or three of those if we're going to get out of this mess of the cost of living crisis. But everything is masked because nobody wants to talk about it.
We need to break our reform recession. That's it.
Explain that to me.
Well, we keep kicking when it comes to significant economic reform, it's in the too hard basket, and we keep kicking the can down the road. And the reform is we need to reform government, federation, tax code, industry policy, housing policy, and flip the script because that's the only way you start to do things. So there we are.
We're kicking the can down the road because no political will, right? I mean, as we were talking about before, it comes back to the Liberal Party not wanting to be strong.
Well, yeah,
we're seeing it we've seen the demise, absolute destruction of the Conservative Party in the UK. Reform, Nigel Farage's party is now polling above the Conservatives in some polls, I understand. Yeah. That's extraordinary. I mean, that's only been around for like a year or two, that party. That is extraordinary.
Yeah, but
in Canada even... Sorry, mate, go ahead.
Oh, just like in the Nigel Farage case, it's the Nigel Farage party. I mean, if he goes, then, it's still very much a party that lives.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of issues. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of issues with that party. I'm just saying as a benchmark, as a kind of a, indicator, that's pretty extraordinary stuff. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the AfD in Germany, obviously, the more right-wing party in Germany rising. I won't call it far right because that's to sort of be excessively negative about it, I think. I don't think they're trying to cast that, put it in that pigeonhole, but it's not. It's just a normal right-wing party. It's certainly not centre-right, but it's right-wing. You've got that happening in Germany. You've got that happening in the UK. You've got Conservative Party of Canada, the leader Pierre Poilievre doing really, really well in all of the polls, right? Because he's being much stronger on these issues. He's being more Trump-like than Peter Dutton. So there was a state election, by-election in Victoria last weekend or weekend before in the electorate of Werribee, which is I think West Melbourne electorate, somewhere between Melbourne and Geelong.
Labor heartland.
Labor heartland. And if I can just bring up, we've got the ABC's webpage here. We can quickly have a squiz at that, I think. So this is kind of an indicator of, what people are looking at this as a bellwether for, where the mood is at the moment. And there you have it. Once the preferences are distributed, the Liberal Party looks as though it's going to end up with 49.4% of the vote, and the Labor Party with 50.6%. Yeah. But we're seeing a swing from Labor of 10% there to the Liberals. If we go to the first preference count before you distribute preferences, and we just have a look at these top performers, we can see that the Liberal candidate actually had a swing to him of 3.7 only, and got 11,578 and finished first past the post there. But of course, won't win it probably unless after the preference allocation. But the ALP's John Lister, 11,448, and a minus 16.7% swing against. 16.7% swing against in Labor heartland. That is a sign that, you know, there are horrible things to come, right? For Anthony Albanese.
But they're clearly going to be a drag on the federal vote. Now remember, Victoria and New South Wales didn't even nominate candidates until 6 weeks out from the last federal poll. That's how bad the Liberal Party was in those states. The LNP had all their candidates well out in the things like 18 months ahead of time. So we can say what we want about the LNP, but their party machines clearly learnt off Labor, right? Clearly. And so I think, if anything, you know, that brand Labor is definitely terminal. Remember, the Liberal Party in Victoria, New South Wales is, if whoever wins 25 seats in New South Wales, if the coalition win 25 seats in New South Wales, it's over. Don't even bother about WA. It's fine. It's done. That's basically where it's done, right? And here's the thing: they could actually still pick up a seat or two in, still 2 or 3 seats in Queensland, the Liberal Party, which is extraordinary. I mean, so, you know, for Labor, their support base is becoming more narrow. Their preference flows. So, for example, the frenemy thing is starting to work against them. They can't keep, if they preference the Greens, they're actually, Labor members are losing. And people who vote, exactly, people, particularly centre-right Labor voters, are here going, they can't stomach the idea of the Greens. And so, you know, I think Labor's got a big, like they've got a 30% primary vote, right? And that's in a good year, 31%. They have to come up with a way to conjure up how to grow their primary vote. I can't see how they'll do it. There's no way they can do it. So unless, for example, they knock the lights out in where? Victoria? WA is their strongest state at the moment. A mining state, really, and it's going to be very difficult. So they're the tea leaves, Damian, from this part of the world, I'd say.
Well, people are saying that that there's a independent Paul Hopper that picked up 8% of that, or almost 9% of that vote from Labor. And they're saying that he's the reason behind that collapse. I'd say he's only part of the reason, or maybe, you know, because it was local issues that people are feeling that, you know, out there in those suburbs, they're sick of being overlooked and they want better roads, they want more transport options, etc. But, you know, if you look at this guy, this independent Mr. Hopper, he's a local car dealer, and it's his second time standing as an independent. And he took half of that 17% that Labor lost. So, you know, that's pretty extraordinary. I don't know, you know, what side of sort of the political spectrum Mr. Hopper leans, but it would seem to me if he's a small business guy, and comes from a family in the area that is extremely well known. That goes back. There's a suburb called Hoppers Crossing, I think, that was named after his ancestors in 1911. So it kind of goes back a bit. Their connection to Werribee. You know, he's been described in the media as a fitness fanatic who hits the gym daily. I mean, he sounds like sort of your classic, you know, small business guy who you know, your classic traditional, probably liberal.
And you know why? And do you know why they're like that? It's because they're not owned by anybody. They don't have to be owned by anybody. They're their own people. That's what makes them authentic. That's what like thing is. The Republicans don't own Trump, for example. It's the it's the other way around.
I'm very sceptical of the, I'm pessimistic about Australia's prospects of cracking the two-party system, and I really do believe that, if you want reform, you've got to work it within the major parties to get that reform in a sensible and balanced way. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is a trend. People's frustration is at a point where I thought it was going to be at the last federal election, but it wasn't, I don't think, as much as I thought it was going to be. A lot of people did think it was going to be pretty high, but it wasn't. And people tended to still vote for the major parties. But maybe there is going to be more of a swing to independents and minor parties this time around.
Perhaps. But, as soon as that unemployment figure has a 6 in front of it, they'll tend to go back to what they know.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
The Other Side with Damian is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame. And follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side. Stay in touch. Check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.